Welcome to the Stories Are Soul Food podcast with your hosts, Brian Kohl and best-selling author, N.D. Wilson. This audio is brought to you by Cannonball Books and Great Homeschool Conventions.
Okay, let's go. Let's do this.
Here we go. We're on another delightful step in our adventure through N.D. Wilson's canon.
Right.
Stepping. We might do other things along the way, but right now I'm having a bunch of fun. So I assume I want to talk about Dandelion Fire.
That being the end
goal.
The end we have in
yes,
mind. Brian needs to be having fun.
If I'm having fun, then hopefully our listeners also.
Today we are talking about Dandelion Fire.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think it's a great one as we're heading into summer.
Yeah.
It touches on many of the themes. So can you start out by explaining, is this something, this book 2, you've described how it's the start or the second piece of what was originally going to be one book.
Yep.
But when did you have the idea for the transformation or the second sight as kind of like the fundamental thing that this book is about?
So that comes, I mentioned Robert Kirk and the Celtic mythology around the seventh son. It's not just Celtic, but the seventh son and the second sight. That was there. And that was interesting to me ever since I read the appendices attached to an edition of Rob Roy. Weirdly.
Okay.
So there was some appendices attached to the book Rob Roy, and it referred to this book called The Secret Commonwealth. And I went in there and I mentioned that Sir Walter Scott couldn't find an original copy of this. I'd mentioned this before, and that was a big part of it. And so in thinking through it, in the seventh son and the second sight, I had decided I preferred the discovery, the coming of age, like coming into your second sight, inheriting your second sight, which was kind of part of the mythology, was that the seventh son inherits this power, this ability.
Okay, so rather than it being
from birth.
Okay, right.
It's not a baby, a toddler who can see the fairies, although that's funny. It gives you lots of potential for humor. It's not what I wanted to do. So I like the idea of this unexpected kid coming into an inheritance. And so that's where that necessitates a transformation. That necessitates some form of transformation. And I wanted it to be natural magic, if that makes sense, meaning not manipulative. It's inherited, it's authority. And so one of the big discussions that happens everywhere, and as a side note, for all you people out there who have liked me a lot and are ready to stop liking me, one of my criticisms of the Harry Potter books.
We do actually need to get deeper into this because we've had so many questions.
Yeah, one of my criticisms there, and I enjoy the Harry Potter books and I'm grateful for them, and I'm not kibitzing at all there, is that she writes like somebody who does not believe in magic.
Okay, interesting. You mean she kind of just, it feels like a plot device to you, or not real?
Yeah, it's like somebody writing in a steampunk world. They don't actually think there's a steampunk world. It's like, okay, here's this artificial thing I've created that's fun, wish fulfillment, escapism. It's fun, but it's not something I think is going to tell you anything more about the real world. And like you're not discovering more about this world. This piece of art is not taking you deeper into the artistry of God and the narrative of God. So
is that connected with how she doesn't use magic for seeming things like that you would expect her to, Harry Potter's broken glasses or something like that, where the magic at one hand can be used to do something cute and everyday, and on the other hand can be used to do something murderous and huge, but there's no sense of scale between the two, or no distinction?
I think the biggest tell is the fact that the moral line between her, she has no like magical philosophy, and the moral line between what makes a good curse and what makes a bad curse is as arbitrary as a speed limit.
Okay,
there's no intrinsic evil to this curse that's explained or understood. So you think about in Lord of the Rings, power that comes from what versus power that comes from what. You have two different fonts of power, right? Gandalf is not drawing his power from the same place, that Sauron is. So Saruman is, and then abuses it and starts trying to pull, power from this other source as well. For Saruman, it's all about authority and where the power comes from. So if you look at scripture and you look at this world, there are people with abilities. There are people who have strange abilities, and I'm not talking about potion mixing or charms or stuff like that. I'm talking about historically, people who have historically been able to turn sticks into snakes, that kind of thing. And so given that we live in a world where people can turn sticks into snakes, what is that?
In your Bibles.
Yeah. And what's the source of the power? So when Moses does it, he's doing it with the authority to do it that has been granted to him. He's not doing it seizing power. He's not stealing it. He's not manipulating it. There's no conjuring trick to, force the universe to do something, right? And there's no hack. And that's honestly the way a lot of magic is treated, is like it's a hack. Now, this is not entirely true for Potter, because she has this inheritance thing, and she dabbles with the Patronus and other stuff, or she dabbles in sources of magic and natural gifting and things like that. But is it by authority? Is it from God? Is it from God? Is it divine? And you are given it and tasked with it, like Spider-Man, great power comes great responsibility. Like, is this been given to you to do a job and you must obey with it? Or are you seizing it and trying to grow in power out of personal ambition, etc.? So with Dandelion Fire, I wanted to really clearly communicate that this is an inherited natural magic. This is somebody who has a magical ability the way the birds can fly.
Right. Okay.
It's baked into his design, and this comes to him in that way. So he grows into this, and there's going to be something that touches him in nature, something he's going to see that identifies like the brand, the motif, the typology of his power. And it's going to be the first thing he really sees. So the first thing he really sees the true nature of and touches, he'll be branded by, and this will be the outworking of his power. Typological representation of his power.
Okay, but can we contrast with Darius, I guess, as an example of someone? Yeah. So Darius with similar things.
Yep.
Give us the pitch on Darius. I think is a very fun sort of fake character.
So Darius is this villain, a sub-villain in Dandelion Fire, and he's connected to fungus. So, it's like this mushrooms are...
But he thinks he's connected to oaks, or wants to be connected to oaks, right? Okay.
So he wants it to be he wants his typology to be big and magnificent, and that his magic is the power of the oak tree. It's actually, mushrooms that blow up overnight. It's like, so he's this little fungal, he's got this little fungal power, which is incredibly powerful, and which he is ashamed of, insecure about. But, so Darius has this insecurity, and you see that in multiple things about him. Like, he has a terrible jawline, and he uses his power to hide that, to mask that, to give himself a
nice jaw. Big jaw.
He is this insecure manipulator, and it's all grasping. Henry sees a dandelion, and he actually starts to see it. It starts to kind of come apart in his vision, where he can actually see the word that is the dandelion, the speech that is the dandelion. So he's looking at the thing that has been spoken, but he's getting to see the work. So he's kind of seeing God's work in creating this dandelion, and he touches it. It's like he reaches out, can't stop himself, and he touches it and burns his hand. And as a result, as he comes into his powers as a green man, as a seventh son, the dandelion accurately reflects, his potency.
And you kind of highlight the theme of a dandelion as one of the more quick life cycles in the plant world, both bright and ash at the same time, and then starting over magically again. Yeah,
it's a phoenix.
Yeah.
It's this phoenix plant that burns bright and fast, goes to ash, and then is back.
Yeah.
And is back 1,000-fold.
How do you feel about dandelions in your yard?
I have no problem feeding them to my tortoises.
There you go.
They love them. So I actually haven't had real dandelion problems for a long time, ever since my tortoises were spending this part of the year outside grazing, because they eat those dandelions down to nubbins.
Hey, that's what I
have
need.
A lot
that's
of clover.
Awesome.
I have a lot of clover because they don't like clover, but they destroy the dandelions.
Okay, so tortoises are bee friends. They get along well.
Yeah, they are. So it's I think that basically the biggest thing with this transformation and Henry York coming into his powers is I wanted it to be like Moses. I wanted it to be like Elijah. I wanted it to be like a minor prophet. I wanted to communicate anti-wish fulfillment.
Yeah. Okay.
To
that.
be Moses, to be Elijah, to be Samson even, really sucks. I mean, that is like, oh, bad news. Like, bad news. You're the dude. You're the guy. So
okay, I have a great counterpoint.
And then as a side note, what that means is the standard you're held to is incredibly high. So Moses, the Israelites did a little bit of misbehaving in the wilderness. We all know this. There was a fair amount of misbehavior in the wilderness.
Just a little idolatry, a little Sabbath breaking.
Yeah, plenty. But even the ones who made it into the promised land, grumbling, all sorts of stuff. So there's ones who didn't make it, right?
Right.
There's plenty who made it to the promised land, but did so.
Still fell at the first hurdle, which I think is the Battle of Jericho.
Yeah, just lots and lots of sin. And Moses was not permitted because he struck a rock.
Instead of speaking to it, right?
Yep, he struck a rock. And so he was banned from the promised land. Like that is heavy. Like that's it is really like to more light, more grace, more authority, a much higher bar.
Yeah.
Which also tells you how intense the fall of David was, King David. That's not that what David did was horrible for anybody. But to do it, in
as
his
the
position,
man after God's own heart.
Yeah. Is a far more intense fall.
Okay, but I just wanted to
We're wandering all over the place.
Right, which is fun. This is going to make more people mad, maybe. But I think Aragon is a fantastic example of someone who does a transformation based on wish fulfillment. Because if you remember the Aragon, or you may not remember, Aragon as a book, which I do not enjoy, and I think is a ripoff of all of the flavor that we've talked about as opposed to any of the substance. What he does is he has his main character have to become part elf in order to succeed, because he's made the humans so weak that he needs to level up and make his main character part of an elven, so that he can bond with the dragons and become the savior for this world. And so when he becomes an elf, he becomes faster, smarter, wiser, better at fighting. Basically a whole transformative thing, which when contrasted, something you said earlier, contrasted with Henry as someone who touches a dandelion and gets down to the root of things. I like that so much better, because I was so irritated when when Aragon's character suddenly jumped species
and leveled up by jumping.
Suddenly it had gotten his butt kicked over and over and finally leveled up and was able to defeat the bad guys. And I thought, this isn't nice. This is not how stories work.
At least not well.
Right.
And as a little asterisk right there, I'll say, of Aragon and a lot of other books, I have no opinion, because I kind of made a habit of not reading the books of authors that I had to do events with.
Oh, okay.
And it was just, so I have no opinion. I mean, I do. I don't.
You can let me just maintain the opinion.
So the big thing is, because after the first time I had to do a big event with a bunch of authors, I found that it was much easier for me to say, I'm so sorry. I haven't read your book, because authors have this weird, I don't know what it is about us. I don't do it, but I don't know where it comes from. This weird desire to ask people, did you read my book? And what did you think? And
even when don't ask questions you don't want the answer to, I guess should be the rule.
And so it was much easier for me just to say, go fight, win, go team Random House, go team Knopf. Let's go do events together. Yeah, that'll be fun. And I really liked Chris. Chris is a nice kid. He's not a kid anymore, but he was a nice kid. And, it was just much simpler. So it was much simpler to just not form the opinion.
There you go. Well, I won't make you push into that.
And so, but so there's a fair amount of like contemporary stuff that was coming out. Anything that was coming out in the same season I was coming out in, I was dropping a book in the same moment, and I knew we were going to be at events together. I just didn't read any of it.
Yeah.
And it made it very easy. Although I will confess, once sign a bunch of copies of Moon Over Manifest for prize winners of a 100 cupboards writing contest in the state of Florida, because Random House failed to get my books there. And so all the winners showed up, and they were supposed to like have lunch with me, and we're going to hang out, and I'm going to sign copies for them. And then the people came over, they opened all the boxes from Random House, and they were
the wrong book.
The Newbery winner, Moon Over Manifest. And I was like, well, they asked me if I could just inscribe these copies for these kids, which I then did.
Cool.
And immediately afterwards, found myself at a festival, at a table with the author, at another event,
Yeah.
and sitting next to her. And I told her, I was like, so here's the thing. I need to make a true confession.
I signed your books.
Yeah, she was awesome about it. But anyway, as far as Dandelion Fire goes, I think I want to write like somebody who believes in prophets, and I believe in magic, and I believe that there's evil magic, and I think there is holy power. I think there is such a thing as holy power in the world, and I think you can inherit it. It can be given to you. It has functioned in the world often, New Testament and Old, wherever you land on the cessation of gifts and all that kind of stuff. Where I think that was an early church thing. I don't think it's normal for a person to be vested with power, special powers. I don't think that's really a thing now, but they, a common thing. I don't think that's the mode of God's operation at this point, but it has been a mode of operation in the world for thousands of years and has been used for thousands of years. And when I write, I want to write like this is the world. And so Henry's transformation in Dandelion Fire and the foil I create with the character of Darius to show the other approach.
Okay.
Sort of the other
so
approach.
So a similar sort of, maybe a similar method, but they're doing opposite things with it, or a similar use of the words at the core of the universe.
So I have kind of a double foil situation where I've got Darius, who has the same kind of power that Henry has, but he is like a trust fund kid, abusing it, ashamed of it, ashamed of the honesty of it, the way it reflects him, masking it, morphing it, like just not owning it, not receiving it, and not getting a return on it, and as a villain as a result. And then there's the Hermione, the actual witch queen, who her entire mode of operation and drawing power is drinking life dry. So she consumes the life force of things around her, grass, bees, doesn't matter, anything.
Yeah.
She drains it and then moves on like a tick.
Yeah.
And when Henry draws power from what's around him, afterward, there are more dandelions. There's not dead dandelions. The dandelions explode and he explodes. Like it is this mutual thing that builds. So he gets a return on it. The dandelion reflects him because it is this little phoenix weed, that goes, burns, goes, and can grow anywhere, explodes through sidewalk cracks, can't be kept down. And it's very small and not big and fancy. I didn't want it to be this big, lofty inheritance. Like it turns out, here comes some amazing mythical creature from the sky that is your totem, and you're super special. It's like, no, here's a weed that's in every kid's yard in the world. And I wanted to use one that would be virtually everywhere in the world, that every kid who read the story could go look at a dandelion and really look at it and think about it differently.
Okay, so you also have this key scene where Henry is cruciform.
Yep.
And I think gets wine, right? Gets a bit of wine vinegar put in his mouth of some sort. Is there a sense in which you see what happens in your story as something that's gonna happen in every Christian or every kid's life? This sort of death and resurrection scene, or what kind of are you doing with such an overt symbol like that?
The same thing that God is doing all the time, because 100% of my readers will have a death scene.
Yeah.
So it's, they're gonna have one, and there is a resurrection on the other side. So the question is who you image and how you face it. And as part of that, we all get little micro deaths. There's constant deaths. The person we were last year is gone. I just got my gallbladder out and I'm now different. That last version of me is now in the grave. And I've done that with brain surgery too. It's like, there's all these moments where you lay things down and things die, phases die. And the
phase of Nate with a gallbladder
is over.
It's over.
It's over. And it's still in the grave and I came out.
Yeah.
But you do those little images are baked in. It happens every night. Every single kid lays down and goes to sleep in the darkness. And every morning there's a resurrection. And every Sunday. And like it happens on a weekly basis, and it happens on a nightly basis, and it happens on an annual basis. And it just winter, spring, like God baked it in such a looping, repetitive way that I want to highlight that with pieces where every death for a believer, every death for somebody faithful should look a certain way, and it shouldn't be panicked and selfish and terrified. It needs to be cruciform. So every death of a hero should look a little like Samson, which is to say cruciform, hands out, hands up, like that's the way of it.
That's great.
And so that's what I have with, that's what I have going with Henry there. And I learned from what Lewis said. And so I just try to make stuff obvious enough that people don't miss it, but have enough layers that once they've been alerted, like once you've like woken up their nerve endings to look for typology, they'll find a lot more. But, but you have to kind of be a little on the nose.
Right.
So that they start hunting for those Easter eggs. It's also in Dandelion Fire I pull in this christening scene when Henry York receives his true name. I have an actual baptism. Like here's a christening. But the reason why I did that is because back to the Robert Kirk Secret Commonwealth mythology, he warned people that character warned people that the fairies were coming for him and they wanted to take him. He was going to get pulled off into the other plane, into this second sightville. And then he disappeared. And so there's a hill in Scotland where they say this is where Robert Kirk vanished. But he wrote the book. He was this Presbyterian pastor, seventh son, wrote the book, and then vanished after warning people that this was going to happen. He came to his wife in a dream, and because she was pregnant when he disappeared, and said that the only magic that couldn't hold him, that would break fairy magic, was the christening of his kid. And so the story goes that he warned her when he walks into the house, it's like he will be able to pass through the christening because they can't keep him from that. She has to throw a knife over his head, like when he walks in the christening. That was the dream. He then walked into the christening. He did, in fact, walk into the christening, according to all the witnesses there. Everybody froze up and panicked, and he walked through and then walked out the back door and was never seen again.
They didn't throw the knife?
Didn't throw the knife.
Oh, man.
And so it was this wild little Celtic story. And I was like, okay, I'm going to pull these themes in, steal from Robert Kirk. And,
so Henry needs to be christened because the warp spasm, as you call it, can kind of go two directions.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So he's, Henry is being christened. He's at this point in Dandelion Fire, he's found his true family. He's found his origin and has to receive, enter that family and enter into his actual identity, which is associated with his second sight, his status as a seventh son.
Yeah.
It's like an heir to his father.
Yeah.
And there has to be a christening. And so I really liked pulling that in.
I like it too. I think that's fun. Okay. I have a choose your own adventure option.
Okay.
We can either talk more deaths, as in jumping over to Harry Potter and talk Harry Potter death, or we can go talk about one of my favorite aspects of Dandelion Fire, which is the grouchy, declining Fitzferren in the ruins of their nation. and what exactly you enjoyed about that, because clearly you did. This sibling rivalry going back to hundreds of years. Eli making fun of his sister for having a goat and being a queen, Anyways, choose your own adventure.
Yeah, okay. We'll do a little bit of both. And I'll say that another one of the most frequent questions that comes to me, there's not the other thing, I'm going to hit a bunch of stuff real quick and then we can elaborate on some. I use the arrow of chance in Dandelion Fire as the arrow fired at random that slew a king. I use that as a sort of a totem, a relic of power that comes out. It's another Old Testament thing. I really start to unpack how Middle Eastern, how much I didn't want this story to be a Northern European fable. I love Lewis and I love Northern European fantasy, but this was very Middle Eastern.
Yeah.
It's like Henry, it turns out, is, named after Judah Maccabee. And there's this Jewish Old Testament-y vibe that I pull through the whole thing, with names like Mordecai and, it's obviously in a more, it's merged. I'm pulling it up using a lot of Northern, alternate world stuff too, but I wanted to really camp there. So there's Old Testament relics. That's all part of pointing to the prophets and the way magic functions and the way magic should actually function. He didn't Henry didn't find a charm book where he learned if he holds his hand a certain way, he can manipulate the universe into doing tricks. It's like
Right.
he's discovering that he is an heir in a particular lineage, and that lineage includes great Old Testament heroes. That's kind of the world in which he lives. One of the most frequent questions I get asked is why I like to repeat names. And so I have Uncle Frank, and then I have Fat Frank, Frank Fat Fairy, and then I have Henry in Henry, Kansas, and I have Henrietta. And part of this is just personal amusement. And part of this is because this is the way it is in the world. As you know, we have 3 Brians working at Canon.
Yeah.
We do this in life.
We do it in triplicate.
Yeah. So I kind of wanted to, but that's something I have been asked recently, and I have been asked so many times over the years. But some of it is like with Henry and Henrietta. Henrietta is the other side of the same coin. So they represent, 2 different ways to be flawed and 2 different ways to be faithful.
Yeah.
But kind of coming from a very similar place. So they both become more and more similar.
Yeah, they're a Mark and Jane approach to kids fantasy. Yeah.
And so they are, but they're becoming more alike as they both grow. But Fat Frank, I just thought it was funny to have a second Frank and to have him be Fat Frank. And it turns out.
A fairy.
Yeah, Franklin Fat Fairy. So you have Francis, Uncle, you have Francis, and then you have Franklin, but they're both, Frank.
Those are different names.
Uncle Frank and Fat Frank. But then to your point, like the Fitzferren is the decay of civilization when it's built around manipulation and power grabbing. It just always devolves.
I knew there was some reason that the Fitzferren felt like America right now.
Yes.
I thought, normally you'd want to grab from our world. Our world would feel like the place, but I feel weirdly at home in this destroyed Fitzferren place where Eli's making bacon in a tiny destroyed house. I thought this is where we are.
Yes. And what we need to do is just thank God for our bacon and move on. But yeah, it's one of the ways to make the fantasy worlds real is to make them, it's just say, make them real. Flawed characters will burn bridges over very, very petty things. Things will fall apart. Bitterness is there. Pettiness is there. And it is comic and sad. It's both tragic and amusing. And I did it with the Fitzferren because it's 1 degree removed. It enables me to do it in a way that is not as distressing for kids. Because if I do it with humans, and I really show that with humans, it's an Oscar movie and it's pretty stressful. But doing it with the Fitzferren makes it kind of comic. It's a little bit comedy, but also reveals the nature of bitterness. And a kid can read it and just be like, just stop. Like, just say you're sorry. Just be done.
Right. And then the age allows you to do that too. When you let them live for so long, we can see it played out over time.
Yeah. Yeah. So they're very old and they're still being just petulant dummies.
Yeah. The worst aspects of Henry and Henrietta. Yeah. You can see that.
Say, let's let this weed grow for a couple hundred years and see what happens. So that's why I did it there. But also because it provides a kind of realism to that fantasy. So authors have a tendency to enter into a fantasy world and then to make it nothing like a real world at all. Like it's like watching a period movie where they forget that people would be dirty if you're bathing once a month. It's, I just showed my kids a couple episodes of Downton Abbey, and I was sitting here, and my kids are like, they all have perfect teeth,
right?
Perfect teeth. And when did maids start like plucking their eyebrows like this? It's like it's so. Yeah. Of its moment now.
It's manicured, yeah.
Yeah, and they did such a meticulous job recreating this moment in time from the early 20th century, and yet it's still people from right now playing dress-ups.
They couldn't resist spit shining everything.
Yeah, because it's like, well, that would be, the current audience would fail to connect with that person if that person has bad teeth. Like, we will just judge them if they don't have orthodonture. And they're right. And if she has big bushy eyebrows, it's going to be weird unless big bushy eyebrows are in right now. And so we have all these fads from the exact moment that will enable a global audience to attach and sympathize with the character dressed up in the accoutrement of the period. So when we do it in fantasy, we hop over into fantasy and then animals don't smell all of a sudden. and the streets aren't that dirty, and
all the good guys are entirely noble. Maybe.
Right.
And
there's no flaws and there's no pettiness. And you also have, and I could throw another we'll talk about Hunger Games at some point, but a complete misunderstanding about how society functions as an organism. Like what causes dissension in people, how people, humanity collectively function, where their alliances go and so on. So the Fitzfarren are all it's there to provide realism. The pettiness, the decay, the rot is there to provide reality to the fantasy. It's there also with one degree of separation, so I can actually kind of explore the long-term rot of rivalry and pettiness and envy, the destructiveness of envy.
Yeah.
And also because I find it really funny. So, and I enjoyed writing that stuff. Deaths. You want to talk about deaths too?
Yeah. The question being, so you talk about how each Christian death is Christ-like, is cruciform in some way.
Yeah.
That gets
Should be.
What's the do people overdo this is a Christ-like death thing? Is that something we need to worry about I sometimes find people reading a story and every death becomes Christ-like. But then because we're reading Lord of the Rings, I guess, and Gandalf is a figure who dies and comes back bright white. What is Rowling doing with the end of her?
Well, I think she's absolutely playing with Christian typology there. And the thing is that I think she believes in that. And it's far more compelling than her use of magic because she actually, magic for her is entirely make-believe and this isn't.
Yeah.
So I think that she believes in sacrificial death and she believes to her, whatever extent her, her, I don't know, strain of Anglicanism allows, she believes in resurrection, at least as a concept, if not as a historical event.
Right.
I don't know. I honestly don't know where she lands on the historicity of the resurrection, but given that the Archbishop doesn't really care, I think it is compelling and I think it works in Potter. The stuff that I don't like is like, no, you can't say that curse because it's a bad curse.
Right.
That's like you can't use a gun against the Nazis because that's a bad gun. Okay, like what made it
right?
bad?
So she has those three, like the one that controls other people, the one that tortures other people, and the one that kills other people.
One that causes pain, one that controls, and
so you would say
kills.
There are obviously situations where good guys must do all three of those things.
Yeah.
So you don't think there's any sort of evil in using, say, the Imperious curse, jumping into her universe.
Exactly. And it's because she doesn't do the philosophical work behind it
to explain why.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to all be on the page. It's a kid's book, but like George Lucas did a better job in terms of
the Force.
Yeah. And it's like, okay, we can find it Manichaean and we can disagree with it and think it's wrong, but it is a coherent worldview for his version of evil and his version of good.
And why Darth Vader's bad.
Yeah. So it's like there's this struggle of two different types of power. Now he doesn't explain why one is good and why one is bad. And the whole thing breaks down when you don't know. There's no reason to know which one's which. There's no higher authority that judges between them. They're just two opposing forces. But at the very least, there's a coherence to the dark side. Whereas this is don't drive 55 and at 45.
Okay. So you think
that's not a moral boundary that really works for the collision of worlds.
Yeah. So you think it's something that you really want to connect where and what the motivation of their magic is for. Because I guess Voldemort, we're so used to thinking of him as a bad guy because he looks like a bad guy.
Yeah, because he's snaky.
Right. And has no nose.
But then so is Harry. Snaky.
Right. And so the difference that Rowling would make between the two would be, wouldn't it be that manipulation one?
No, it'd be personal gain. She's doing kind of like the basic Marvel movie thing. Power and control versus defending the helpless. And I think that's all. Okay. That's all great. As far as the boundaries of the actual divide between the sides go, it makes total sense.
You just want the philosophy behind it to match up.
Yeah, it's like one side says, we will not use a machine gun.
Yeah.
Black powder muzzle loaders only. And Voldemort says, ha ha ha. I use 30 round clips.
Yeah.
Mags. Sorry for all you gun people.
Well, there's that weird, There's that weird part where I think Harry uses the spell that Snape has, that Snape invented, Sectum Sempra or something.
Yeah.
It slices somebody, and everybody's kind of on the boundary of, I think that's a bad spell, but I'm not sure.
Like, is that what just happened?
Apparently, we're only allowed to stun people, but if they die on accident, because you stun them out of the sky or something like that.
Yeah, you knocked them off their broomstick.
Right.
But anyway, it's
interesting. Okay.
So it would not have been hard. It would not have been hard. I benefit from her success. I benefit a great deal from her success.
Yeah.
Her creation of a fantasy readership.
Yeah.
And the ways in which the ways in which the typology is clearly Christian also created an appetite for that. And I think Harry Potter is I think it's just a net plus. And I
should say that too. I just reread it again recently and enjoyed it even more than I thought I was going to. But that's where this is critique coming from. It's because it's fun. I think that's what we do.
It's good fun. But the thing is, when something is good fun and then has massive cultural impact, it, like everything else, it's going to get held to a higher standard. And so if Harry Potter had sold 10 million copies and been, a blowout summer bestseller, and that had been it, like that's one kind of popcorn meal, but it actually has been so potent and so effective, and it gets a steak treatment. It's getting that Lord of the Rings treatment. It's getting Lewis. It's getting Tolkien treatment. And the fact is, Lewis and Tolkien nod. We're all human. They make mistakes.
Yeah.
There are gaps in Lord of the Rings that should have been filled, and it's funny to me that they weren't. I don't understand why he didn't do it. And I think there are significant...
And we've had episodes about that, so we're not being unfair.
And I love Tolkien, and I love Lewis, and I really enjoyed Harry Potter. So these comments, these thoughts, like these are things that I think would make the series significantly more potent if she had done. If there was a clear binary behavior, either, and I think a more biblical approach, obviously, than the Manichaean dark side, is to have that there is a power source. There is actually, a divine source. And then there is the manipulation and the taint and the brokenness that can be used this way, or it can be used this other way. Lewis did this in Magician's Nephew by representing walking through the gate to get the apple for somebody not yourself, or climbing over the wall to eat it for yourself. And that's where he boils the entire thing down. Like, you can go get the fruit of life, but are you going to steal it? Because if you take it for you, it's stealing. If you're taking it for somebody else, you can take it freely. Walk through the gate and do it. And so the witch climbs the wall for her, and eats it. And then, the kids go through the gate and take the fruit for another. And so that's how Lewis represents it. And he boils it down that way. So with Dandelion Fire, to circle back, that's what I wanted to do. Henry York inherits something, and he has to steward it, and he has to get a return on it. Darius inherits something, and he is abusing it.
Yeah.
Hermione is stealing and consuming and devouring.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she's just that devourer.
Yeah.
So, and that's we've wandered hither and yon, but I think we kind of covered Dandelion Fire. It's one of my, I would say it's one of my favorites, but I do like them all. I can't really. As soon as I start listing off my favorites, I just list off my books. I don't have one that there's things I really love about every different project I've been allowed to work on. So
that's great.
This one was the big jumbo meat to the original single volume of 100 cupboards. And I pulled basically 100 cupboards and Dandelion Fire. That combined length was about the length of the original manuscript.
Oh, wow.
And then, so
Henry is blind for quite a while in Dandelion Fire.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah. I mean, you really feel it. You're like, I want him just to see.
See. So then I had to, when I split everything up, I tore off some chapters, some sections for Chestnut King. And that was sort of like a starter dough. I probably had like 3 or 4 chapters that showed up over there. And then I wrote new chapters for the beginning of Dandelion Fire. Yeah, the setup and everything is
of Dandelion Fire, 100 cupboards.
Dandelion Fire.
Gotcha.
And I wrote some new stuff for 100 cupboards as well, because that needed its own rise and fall.
Right.
Because cupboards was just a rise.
Because it was the act 1 of your book.
And so it needed its own release. And so I wrote new stuff at the end of cupboards, a little bit at the beginning, then a ton of editing. And then Dandelion Fire, new chapters at the beginning, lost a bunch of chapters that went into book 3. but it's the original like Act 2 beating heart of that single volume is
Gotcha.
this book.
That's great. Okay, well, I think we're done. People need to keep asking questions. They need to send them along. I've got a few. I didn't have any specific ones for Dandelion Fire besides the one that we touched on already. So.
I got a lot, so I think I hit everything.
Great. That's awesome.
So there we go. And next time, Chestnut King. And then
Chestnut King. Yeah.
Perfect.
All right.
Perfect. Alrighty. Peace out.
Thanks for listening to this week's edition of the Stories Are Soul Food podcast. If you're someone highly invested in kid fiction and finding the best stories for your kids and you haven't downloaded the Canon app, I want to encourage you to download and subscribe today. You can find things on there such as Christine Cohen's The Winter King, Ethan Nicole's Brave Ollie Possum, Peter Lightheart's Wise Words, a book on Narnia from Douglas Wilson titled What I Learned in Narnia, and much, much more. Download the app today wherever you get your apps and subscribe.